Hindustani music in Mumbai. That's very okay. In June, July 2015, she curated an exhibition titled Music Making Space based on her research. And then her most recent exhibition is an installation at the 11th Shanghai Biennial. So clearly moving between theorizing and art as practice. I'm most excited to introduce Tejaswini and her talk, Making Culture and Maker Culture, Digital Cultural Studies.
Thanks so much, Mohan. Thanks to you and DUTTA for inviting me. It's a pleasure to come back to Singapore after nearly 1 year. I hadn't realized I'd missed it. So happy to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In the true spirit of maker culture, I don't have a paper. I don't even have a printout. So I'm struggling to manage these many screens. Okay. I will come to that in a little while. But because I was going to focus much more on the courses I taught and the things we made in these courses at Lingnan. But after I saw Bengman's and Megan's abstracts, I said I also need to talk about the history of Inter-Asia, a little bit at least. But I will do that through the discussion of academic work in the 20th century, late 20th century, in the Indian context where I've spent most of my working life. So I want to begin by, I guess, again talking about the nation, or talking about the space of the national and the centrality of that space of the national in the academic work of the 20th century. I think it's quite obvious why that was so important, especially in Asia. It was a common phenomenon in post-colonial societies in South and Southeast Asia, in post-war, Cold War regions, or even in post-Civil War or post-revolutionary places like China, that the nation somehow becomes or occupies center stage. And therefore, from the 1950s onwards, what tends to happen in all these locations is that the knowledge needs and the knowledge desires do tend to coincide. They're very largely about democratization, about accessibility, and about critiquing the normative frames of validation, which is a reference to how a universal idea of what is good knowledge or proper knowledge, which we inherit from the modern education system, tends to delegitimize and has delegitimized many different forms of knowledge in the Asian context, for example, in the century or centuries of colonialism, if you like. So what happens between the 1950s and approximately the 1980s, I would say, given a very rough time frame, there is a period of disciplinary consolidation in Asia, coinciding, at least in India, with efforts to narrativize the nation. So in a sense, knowledge forms, major disciplines like sociology and economics and political science become national disciplines, right? They have that clout, they have that prestige, they are in many ways in the seat of government, if you like. They're advisors to the nation state. This is seen as a very radical place to occupy in that time, in the post-colonial nation. So jumping very quickly then in the 1990s, when people like myself, my colleagues, founded a Center for the Study of Culture and Society, which marks in many ways the emergence of cultural studies in India. This follows a period of nearly 2 decades of popular contestations of national priorities. Those of you who know, the Indian context well, and those of you who know South Asia, will understand immediately what I'm talking about. From the late 60s onwards, you have the peasant and tribal movements, you have from the 70s the feminist movement, you have very shortly afterwards the Dalit movement, and sometime after that in the early 90s, the movement of many groups of Muslim intellectuals as well as lay people around questions of the law, questions of identity, and all of these things, right? So when something like cultural studies emerges as a viable intellectual practice, it follows this period of intense contestation in the national space. And the contestation is also one of national priorities. Why do you challenge them? Why do you challenge the way in which the nation has come to be and the way in which these disciplines have then framed the nation? So this contestation and the emergence of cultural studies references that, but also talks but also draws, in terms of its intellectual genealogies, on feminist historical scholarship. I'm referring here especially to the famous work Recasting Women, which came out in the early 1990s, and the subaltern studies historians that many of you would know, who